This is Living Healthy with Your Health Potential, where we explore your options for better health. Brought to you in association with The Woman in You.
Hi, welcome to Living Healthy. I'm your host, Sheryl Worthington-Turgeon. Lyme disease is finally getting the attention of some good doctors and scientists, but many of them are still hesitant to go public. On today's show, author and Lyme advocate Layne Poore of Newport, Rhode Island, is back with us to discuss the progress that's being made in getting Lyme disease the attention it deserves in New England and across the country. A 12-year veteran of Lyme, Layne is actively working on the challenges that Lyme disease presents and shares his extensive knowledge of the disease, the politics involved, and the ways to find hope and healing with others. Hi, Layne. Welcome to Living Healthy. We're so happy to have you back.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
And I know there are many changes that have happened in terms of Lyme disease and the progress that's being made. I think we need to start, though, with laying really a basis for what Lyme disease is.
Well, Lyme disease, taken singularly and by itself, is an infection caused by spirochete, much like the syphilis drill. It gets very cloudy when people start talking about Lyme disease, and you have to incorporate the other diseases that the ticks carry.
What are some of those components?
There's one of the very common ones in New England is Babesia. It's a malaria-like disease. You hear people getting night sweats, drenching night sweats. It will cause an anemia. The parasite, much same as malaria, just eats up red blood cells.
Okay.
So you get a blood supply that, first of all, is lower in volume. You get POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia, which when you go from lying down to standing up, you don't have enough blood and you get faint. A common occurrence, and it's once again one of those symptoms that gets misdiagnosed. They think it's all kinds of things other than just a simple low blood volume. Another disease we get commonly here is Bartonella, which is cat scratch fever. There are two different genotypes that we have of it. We really only test for one, but in Rhode Island we have the Department of Health and a number of other professionals that don't believe that Bartonella actually exists in Rhode Island because they can't prove that it is transmitted from the tick into the human being. They don't know what that process is, so they say if we can't understand it, then we can't know that it's actually happening. Well, my dear Lyme doctor has got over 200 cases of Bartonella. I personally can tell you what burning hands and burning feet feel like, and that's
part of the symptoms of it.
That's a very strong physical symptom of it. There are other diseases, the anaplasmosis, which is more toward the white blood cells, and these are that group of diseases are the ones that take a little bit of time to get into your bloodstream.
So what do you mean about a little bit of time? Can you give us some examples?
The Borrelia, or the spirochetes, I said in my first video that it was a day and a half or so. Well, it turns out that's sort of the median time. The Borrelia can get in there. We have samples from France, Europe, and Finland, where the spirochetes actually are in mice within 6 to 8 hours after they've bitten. Babesia has a funny life where it ends up in the saliva glands of the deer ticks, and generally is transmitted within 30 to 60 minutes, fairly short. The ones that are really dangerous are the tick-borne encephalitic viruses that get into your brain. They get in within 30 minutes. There's some specialized forms of that, the Powassan, which is showing up in New York, and the Heartland virus, which is showing up in the Midwest, all attack the brain. And then finally, there's one that's very, very quick. It's a neurotoxin. We don't know all that much about it, but it's within minutes. And you can get epileptic seizures from it. It can be really nasty, and people are dying from it. Very, very rare. Probably 6 or 7 cases of it in the United States last year. But it's a weird one. It happens when the tick bites, and then when you take the tick away, it goes away. So with the neurotoxin, you find the tick and take it away, and you tend to get better.
So how many components could one possibly develop from one tick bite?
A fair count would be 7 to maybe 8, even 9 infections. This will include the bacteria that we talked about, the Borrelia and the Bartonella. It will include fungus, mycoplasmas. Nasty, nasty bunch of soup coming out of that tick's mouth. Yeah.
Are there any accurate statistics on the prevalence of Lyme today?
No.
And why is that?
The original reporting of Lyme disease is based on the doctor sending in a very simple piece of paper saying, I have a case of Lyme disease.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done it clinically. You may have some tests that you include, and that goes off to the Department of Health. Mm-hmm. The Department of Health decides that those reports have to be surveyed. So then we have this thing called surveyed data. Well, in 2002, Rhode Island Department of Health ran out of money to do surveillance, and the number of cases in Rhode Island went from over 800 to roughly 65.
Wow.
In 1 year. Well,
and when they do surveillance, what's involved in that?
They have to go to the doctor's office, get the doctor to pull the file, read the file, transcribe it, call the patient, talk to the patient, and then it becomes surveyed data. And in the Department of Health, they're very clear about it. They need surveyed data in order to alert the public to the public health danger.
Well, I can imagine with busy doctors' offices, there's no way that's going to happen.
No, they're very reluctant to do that. The best guess that we can do is Connecticut's doing some fairly good reporting and surveillance without all the bureaucratic testing of it. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing parts of Connecticut where there are roughly 670 cases per 100,000 people. If you translated that over to Rhode Island, that would mean we had roughly 6,700 new cases last year. It looks like from the deer density, once again 2002, we were at roughly 10 deer per square mile. Mm-hmm. Today we're a little over 20 deer per square mile in Rhode Island. And that right there is...
If that's any indication of the increase in the tick population, it's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. Also, last August, the CDC revised their annual nationwide numbers from 30,000 cases to 300,000. Multiplied it times 10. They've been very quiet about it. They don't talk about it very much. But they did allow that even that number might be off by a factor of 2 to 4. So we're looking at 1 million cases nationwide. Another challenge in the reporting is that the standardized reporting really only talks about the Borrelia burgdorferi, which is called Lyme disease, the Lyme disease cause. And we have 4 other genotypes in the United States that just are not being reported. We've got Myomotori up here, we've got Andersoni and Americana down in the south. Finally, the spirochete that causes Lyme-like illness in the south has been found. So they're missing all those. The numbers really are way off. They're being choked way down by the reporting surveillance system.
So with the treatment of Lyme today, the public health surveillance of it and the reactions to it, how would you contrast that to, say, HIV a number of years ago when that was first gaining ground?
HIV had the really good fortune of getting up above a certain level of awareness. Mm-hmm. And people started digging in and really finding out what's going on. Mm-hmm. Lyme disease, the tick-borne diseases, still are not being given the credence that they should. You know, it's the #1 infectious disease that is caused by the animal to human transfer systems. Mm-hmm. It's 4 times the infection rate right now of HIV.
Wow.
It's way out there. And it's just, lots of reasons, but it's just not being brought to the forefront like it will be, I think, shortly.
Yeah. Do you think it'll reach a critical point if it hasn't already?
I think it has. I think we're actually beyond the tipping point now.
Do you?
Yeah. A lot of the myths and belief systems of the CDC are crumbling. The surveillance is part of it. The 300,000 is part of it. Insistence by many of the CDC people and the Infectious Disease Society that it only takes 3 weeks of antibiotics to fix it. Persistence doesn't exist. All of these myths that are just slowly being chopped down. The doctors, it's very hard for doctors to adopt to the new science. And the new science is, you know, the 21st century says, hey, this is real, it's worldwide, and it's a global problem, and it's big, it's really big.
So what is stopping the medical community from really grabbing onto this science and running with it and, you know, treating Lyme?
I think the biggest thing is fear. There have been a lot of doctors who have lost their licenses because they were treating with long-term antibiotics. Mm-hmm. And doctors just don't want to go near a hearing in front of a board, a medical board.
And would they still lose their license if they were to treat beyond 2 or 3 weeks now?
In a handful of states, they are protected. We're one, Massachusetts, Vermont. There are numbers of states that are coming along with legislation for that. But it's still, for the rest of the country, it's still pretty dark ages as far as being allowed to do what the doctor and the patient really wants to do. They're scared. There are also some other myths, which is, in Texas, they don't believe they have ticks. Well, we've got studies from 1992 on showing that there are ticks there. There was some disagreement for a while about why people in Texas and the South had these Lyme-like symptoms. And because it wasn't Borrelia burgdorferi, the CDC was saying, oh no, that's not Lyme. It's not Lyme disease. It's Lyme-like. Well, we've got to decide what we're going to call it. It is borreliosis in Europe, Lyme borreliosis. And there are 5, well, in Europe there's 7 genotypes of the spirochete that can infect you and make you sick.
Well, you have noted that recent research shows that certain degenerative or chronic diseases have shown the presence of spirochetes. Now, can you tell me what that correlation is, and sort of the chicken or the egg question of, you know, whether the spirochetes are actually causing the degenerative disease, something such as MS or Parkinson's, or is it because someone has that the ticks are really taking advantage of that? And
it's definitely taking advantage of a compromised immune system. It is not, we cannot say it's causal, but we can say it's adjunctive. And what's really scary is that, well, Alan MacDonald in Boston has been looking at autopsy brains of Alzheimer's people for a long time.
This is an MD?
This is an MD, yeah. He's a globally respected videographer of red blood cells and spirochetes. But he's been able to grow spirochetes from the cysts that the spirochetes leave behind in the brain that look like lesions. Same is true for MS. Same is true for Parkinson's. These plaques in the brain, I mean, the MS people will argue about the amyloid tissues and whatnot, and that really is okay, go argue about that, but look for the spirochetes in there. I've got a silly little saying, doctor, please, a differential diagnosis so we can know if it's spiroketosis. And testing for it gets iffy. It's hard because we don't have reliable tests for Lyme disease for the spirochetes. Or neuroborreliosis is probably the best name for it.
And how was this discovery made?
I think people like Alan MacDonald and Clossy started taking apart brains 20 years ago and looking for damage that was done in the brains. And Alan MacDonald got a bunch of brains from Harvard and looked at them and found 7 out of 10 of these Alzheimer brains had spirochetes, spirochetal damage. For all of those, they're really the idiopathic diseases, the ones that we cannot tell exactly, why they're happening. We can look at the symptoms, but we can't find the causes.
Are you really talking primarily about diseases that affect the brain?
Yes. Neuroborreliosis means nerves. It can mean in the brain. Yeah, but it's definitely there. There's good news about it. We are finding that people who have been misdiagnosed with MS can get better. I have a friend in Connecticut who for 5 years was diagnosed with MS, given steroids, and she met a doctor who knew something about Lyme borreliosis, and he did a test and he found spirochetes, he found Lyme disease, the Western blot, in her, took an MRI of her brain at that point, and over the next 3 years took 2 more MRIs of her brain. She started off with plaques throughout her brain, and a fairly good sized one in her brain stem. All kinds of neurological problems, memory, executive function, cognitive, just being able to make sense of the world. And 3 MRI scans later, the lesions in the brain are virtually gone, and the one in the brain stem is very diminished, almost gone. And it's because she was treated for spirochetes.
Did she then, she did not really have MS,
No.
she had Lyme?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The trouble with the MS and lupus and Parkinson's and all of that is that there are all kinds of components that add to those. There's a cluster of symptoms that doctors like to think of as MS. Well, they overlap into Parkinson's, and Parkinson's overlaps into lupus. They all mix together. And we have these names for these things. I'm not saying that there's not genetic dispositions to the symptoms of MS or dietary elements that will add to it.
Such as sugar?
Such as sugar.
I have to get that in there.
Spirochetes love sugar. Dr. Jones, Ray Jones, who's an excellent pediatric Lyme specialist in Connecticut, asks the kids if they have any chocolate bars, and they'll say, yeah, I had one, and he'll go, oh, feed those spirochetes. They love to feed those spirochetes. Yeah, diet is crucial. I mean,
in terms of somebody that's watching the show that may have one of the diseases that you've mentioned, how does knowing that a spirochete may be part of the concern benefit them?
That's tough, because finding doctors that are going to be amenable to looking for spirochetes when they've made this long-term diagnosis and they've got, they're invested in those diagnoses. I think one of the things that's going to happen is that with the reluctance of doctors to adopt the new thinking about Lyme and spirochetes and the multiple infections, that's a pretty big step for most doctors to go through. Mm-hmm. But I think the finding of cysts and the spirochetes in the brains is really going to be a big tsunami kind of thing. I mean, there's got to be a lot of catch up really quickly with this, and I think it's going to happen. I think the myths and the beliefs and the people trying to pull back on learning this is going to crumble. I think it's at some point it's got to. The floodgates have got to open.
Mm. And how recent is this research that you're talking about?
There's been a flood of research in the last decade. Okay. Some of it goes back to way before that. You can even go back into the turn of the last century, where mm-hmm. people were studying syphilis and the syphilitic damage in the brain, and it looks the same. Really? It looks the same. Yeah. Spirochetal damage from syphilis in the brain is long been documented. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are people who have been saying this for 30 years. Mm-hmm.
But isn't that a different spirochete?
It is different, but it's turning out that in terms of the dementia, I said spirochetes purposefully because we all have dental spirochetes mm-hmm. in our gums.
Which is also a little disconcerting.
Well, and we need to take care of our teeth
mm-hmm.
and our gums because infections can lead to these blooms of dental spirochetes. And they're finding that the spirochete population in the brains in dementia is not just the Lyme, Borrelia burgdorferi, or any of the Borrelia, but it's also the dental spirochetes. It seems that once the Lyme spirochetes, if we call them that, the Tick-Borne Disease, the Lyme spirochetes, once they enter into the brain, it seems to open a pathway for the dental spirochetes to get in there too. Judith McCloskey from Europe has been able to find both the dental and the Borrelia spirochetes in her autopsied brains.
And who is she?
She's a wonderful researcher in Europe. She's another one of these videographers who has captured images of spirochetes. I mean, we're not talking tests where we go in and look for antigens or for antibodies. Mm-hmm. We're actually seeing the spirochetes themselves. I mean, it's physical proof that there are spirochetes in the brain. It's fact. It's right there in color.
So are there any other diseases that have been associated with the spirochetes?
I think the simplest way to answer that is to talk about the missed diagnoses.
Okay.
We've talked about dementia. We've talked about night sweats a little bit with the malaria. It can look like myalgic encephalitis, just brain swelling. It can look like fibromyalgia, where you have muscles in one part of your body in constant tension and pain, and it'll jump around to other parts. One of the largest groups of misdiagnoses are the neuropsychiatric. Anger, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, particularly within teenagers and young ones.
Really? That's really being caused by spirochetes?
Yeah, it's being caused by inflammation in the brain.
Okay.
And it's inflammation in the body, inflammation in the brain, inflamed thoughts, inflamed feelings. When you're under attack by bunches of the tick-borne diseases, it's really a nasty time. And you often feel lost. You'll see people isolate. There are people who committed suicide. My friend Paula Salvo from Providence not long ago. It's misdiagnosed. The list goes on for pages.
So what would you suggest that people do who are concerned about their symptoms, that they think, they may have Lyme or another chronic condition? How can they get some help, support?
Well,
what next?
First of all, I've got to talk about the doctors, because finding doctors who can deal with these autoimmune infections is difficult. Mm-hmm. We have one doctor in Rhode Island who's really doing great work. A couple of others who are quietly working away. Mm-hmm. They don't take insurance, and they're not very public. They've closed their doors because they're just swamped. Mm. But we do have support groups. There's one in Newport, Lyme Newport Support Group. There are a wonderful bunch of Facebook pages and websites where people can go and get information. Lyme Time in Rhode Island is another resource people can use.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think today you've given so much helpful information, because it's really not out there.
It's not, and my hope is that there's hope in all of this, and I think there is. We've got more and more people becoming aware of it. I'm talking to more and more doctors who are going, okay, maybe I better really take a look at this, and it's moving along. I think it's moving along. It's got a way to go, and I'm concerned about that. But
oh, we need you, and I really appreciate that you came on the show, and that you're doing the advocacy that you're doing, and helping to make doctors aware that they really need to help out with this.
Yeah. So it's something we have to do as a community. Stop the divisions, stop the arguing, mm-hmm. get down to the science. Let's take a look at it, roll up our shirt sleeve, and get it done.
Exactly. Well, thanks again, Lane. We're so happy to have you on the show.
Oh, I'm so glad to be back. Thank you.
My pleasure. For more information on Lane Poor, you can visit LymeTimeNRI.org. Find him on Facebook at LymeTimeNRI, or email Lane at LymeTimeNRI@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Sheryl Worthington Turgeon. See you next time on Living Healthy.